Eric.
Hi, how are you, Mike? I think that's Mike.
I just sent you a note. I typed it out.
Ah, yes, I just replied.
Oh, I got it. Yeah. Well, just a quick funny. I think they just haven't got their computer updated yet
Okay,
because I did it last night.
gotcha. Alrighty, well, it's 2 o'clock. I think we'll go ahead and get started. I know quite a few people declined and weren't able to make it, and since I'm recording it and I've already started the recording, they'll be able to watch it anyhow. So yeah, at this point, I would say mute your line, unless you have something to say, feel free to jump in. But I do plan on taking any questions at the very end for topics unrelated to the bullet points that I had sent out earlier. But anyway, welcome everyone for our first joint Sciences and Humanities Department meeting, which we haven't had before. We used to have these meetings much more frequently in the past. The difficulty with them is, understandably, everyone's schedule is a bit unpredictable and quite different. So it's challenging to find a time when we can get everyone together. So that's why I try to keep as much communication restricted to email as possible, just so it's written. You can reference it again if you need to, and I make sure that everyone gets it that way. However, every now and then it can be beneficial to have that more or less face-to-face discussion. So that's what I'm attempting to do today. So it's a pleasure to have all of you here that did manage to join in. I appreciate your time. I guess just to provide a bit of information about me, many of you have not had a chance to speak with me yet, although I've talked to a lot of you over the phone on the sciences side of things as well as over email, so I'm starting to get to know some of you. But I've been here at the Art Institute for 8 years. I teach psychology. I got my bachelor's in psychology at SUNY Geneseo in upstate New York, and then went on to SUNY Albany to get my master's in school counseling. And after that, I went through Argosy University's program to get my EDD in higher and post-secondary education. I've been in a management role here for 6 years, so I guess this is my 7th at this point. And it's been an interesting time, to say the least, and quite a bit has changed, as you all are well aware of. But anyway, I had enough things happening at once here that I felt like I needed to get everyone together to talk about them over the phone, just to go over them in more detail. So the first bullet item I wanted to cover regards scheduling on the Plus track, which is our campus-based students. Now this part of the discussion mostly pertains just to our full-time faculty that we have on the call. But the issue is one concerning the interpretation of the state of Pennsylvania. So what Pennsylvania state requires us to do is we need to have at least 50% of our online students getting instruction directly from our full-time faculty. What we thought before was that having our full-time faculty teach on the Plus track for our campus-based students, we thought that would count toward that 50% that Pennsylvania state requires. However, they recently clarified that it does not. So as a result, our full-time faculty are, at least for the immediate future, not allowed to teach on the Plus track or for our campus-based students. So they have to teach on 3 and 4, so we're in compliance with that Pennsylvania state standard. So this is a bit troublesome for some of our courses that tend to run only for the Plus students or students from our campuses, for example, our biology course. And in those instances, we need to make a rare exception where our full-timers in those areas have to teach campus-based students, or else there'd simply be nothing for them to teach. But aside from that, we're trying to reroute all of our full-time faculty to the online tracks, and then as a result, all of our campus-based students will be taught solely by our adjunct faculty base, if possible. So that's pretty much all I had to say about that. I went through the details with each of our full-time faculty and how it directly influences them already. So I don't suspect there will be many questions about this, but does anyone have a question about this topic?
Eric, does sociology teach off the plus track? Because I'm still teaching sociology on the plus track.
Yes. In some instances, I had to put you in that course because I didn't have enough psychology classes available for you on the online tracks at the time. So what I'm trying to do, Nancy, is put you in only psychology courses on the online tracks from now on. But if there aren't enough running, which is uncommon, but sometimes it happens, I may have to put you in a sociology course on a plus track.
Do you think they might offer sociology on the other tracks? Because I kind of hate giving up teaching what is my discipline.
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's a complicated one. I did recently bring this up with our program chair, and the concern is we have a number of classes that tend to only run for our plus students. So the natural question is, why aren't our online students taking those classes? The current way that their course progressions are set up don't necessarily require them to take a lot of the classes that we offer here. The other issue with that is, beyond it not requiring them to take those classes, it's that those classes may not satisfy the requirements of the degree program, because they need to take a certain number of courses at the 1,000 and the 3,000 level. And in the instance of sociology, if they take sociology, the introductory course, there's no 3,000 level course that opens up for them to advance to after they complete the 1,000 level course. So as a result, it's not helpful for them to take that course because it doesn't allow them to progress to the 3,000 level they need to complete to satisfy their degree program.
Well, if you do discuss it again, remember like last year I did develop that 3,000 level course in sociology, so it's sitting there basically ready to go.
Good. Yeah, it's helpful to know. What I can say is the hands of our e-learning success team are very full at the moment with converting all of our existing courses to the Pinnacle design of the classroom, as well as into Brightspace, which I'll talk about later on in this presentation. So I would highly doubt that they would get to that within the next year and a half, probably, if I had to guess. But perhaps after that, that would be an opportunity we could explore.
Okay then, well, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll move on. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I typed in the chat, but how is this reshuffling going to affect some of us who teach online but are adjuncts?
For you, you shouldn't see much of an impact, at least regarding this particular bullet point of the presentation, with the exception of, rather than teaching more often on the online track, it'll be more likely that you'll teach our plus students on the campus-based tracks that we offer. So that shouldn't have much of an influence on our adjuncts and what you'll be teaching.
But I'll be still online.
Right. Yes, all of the courses we offer.
Okay. I was going to say, because as much as I like working there, I can't.
Yeah. Oh, no problem.
Pittsburgh's a little way from me.
Yeah. Just to clarify, the Art Institute of Pittsburgh Online only teaches online courses. We don't offer any live classes or face-to-face classes. However, we do service our campus locations across the nation, because we have an agreement with them that they can essentially have hybrid programs where the students from those campus locations can come online with us and take classes. So that's what we refer to our plus students or our plus track as. It's those campus-based students from our face-to-face campuses across the nation that are coming to take classes with us. So that's what I mean by that. Good. Well, I'll move to the next bullet point. This will have a more direct impact on our scheduling for adjuncts. So the bullet point is adjunct teaching restrictions. So previously, well, these have actually continued to evolve over the years. As many of you probably recall, there was a time where you were getting quite a few courses, usually 2 at once, year-round, to teach maybe 16 to 20 classes a year. A few years ago, a new guideline came out from Human Resources that limited adjuncts to only teaching 10 courses per year. Now that drastically reduced the number of classes that our adjuncts could teach, and that restriction is still in play, although recently they further clarified it or made an additional stipulation to that, which is that adjuncts may never be in 2 courses at once. Now, they can never be in 2 courses at once, whether it's on the same track, overlapping tracks, even if it's just for a single day. We can't have adjuncts in 2 courses at once. And the reason for that is somehow the legal definition of being full-time has changed from an average of 20 hours a week across the entire year or more to just more than 20 hours in a single day, essentially. That would consider an adjunct faculty as full-time in terms of their status, which legally means we would need to offer a different compensation package than what we have set up through our contracts. So in order for that to work, we have to avoid scheduling adjuncts for 2 courses at once. Now, the problem with this is we are drastically understaffed in order to meet that requirement. So many of you have noticed and pointed out to me that we opened adjunct positions in quite a few different disciplines. After doing my projections over the past few weeks, I determined that I need to hire an additional 45 adjuncts across all of the courses that I oversee. So that will bring, well, it'll effectively double the number of adjuncts that we have on staff. And that's how many we'll need to ensure that at our enrollment peaks, when we have the most students enrolled in our plus track combined with our track 3 and track 4, that we're able to staff all of them, including having a few backup people in case faculty decline or if people get sick, because these things happen. And we need to know that we can have enough faculty on staff to not have anyone doubled up in 2 classes. So I'm in the process of hiring 45 people, which is making me pretty busy. It presents 2 major concerns. One is the direct impact it has on you, because once we hire that many more people, that's going to drastically decrease the number of courses that I can offer you each year, because I have to keep everyone active that we have on staff. So I would anticipate the number of courses that we have for each of you to drop to probably around 3 or 4 per year, maybe more, depending on the discipline, as opposed to what you're used to now, which is probably closer to 6 to 9 courses or so. Sometimes more. Sometimes we hit 10 if it's a bit tighter in your particular area of expertise. But I felt like I needed to tell you all of this in advance because that's a major change that we have to comply with. And the other piece of it is once I hire 45 additional faculty, that's going to be more people than I can manage by myself. So I've been talking with our Associate Dean of Faculty, and as I'm hiring new people, he's going to somehow reassign people that I oversee to other lead faculty. So I don't know exactly when this will happen or how we'll tackle doing that, if it'll be by course or I'm not really sure what our is yet. We're still in the midst of discussing that. But it will happen probably over the next few months. Our goal is to have all these people hired as soon as possible so we can get in compliance with that requirement as soon as possible. So ideally, This will happen quickly, and like I said, that's going to influence the number of courses we can offer each of you. So I know that one's rather complicated and news that you're not happy to hear, but I'll take any questions that you have on it. Okay. Well, if you think of any, let me know. But I'll go ahead and move on to our next topic, which is disability accommodations. So as many of you are aware, we have students that will, for whatever reason, have a particular disability that we need to legally provide accommodations for in order to give them the ability to complete their assignments in a way that's fair and just based upon their natural limitations. And the way that we typically do that, the most common accommodation is affording extra time for students to complete a given assignment. Now, the way we've calculated exactly how much extra time students will get has changed over the years. The most recent interpretation that you're probably all following is counting from the last day an assignment was due to the next one. So that space in between assignment submissions is how much extra time they would get depending on what their additional time is. Usually it's 50% extra time. Sometimes it's 100% extra time. So what the Disability Services team has recently clarified is that that is no longer the way that we're going to calculate it. Instead, what we should be doing is calculating from day one of the given week that the student is in. So if we have a student, let's say it's week 1, and we have an assignment due on day 3 and day 7 of week 1, and if this student gets 50% extra time, we count from day 1 to see how many extra days they'll get to do the assignment. So with the assignment due on day 3, there are 3 days from day 1 for the student to do the assignment. So the student would get, let's see, 4.5 days rounded up to 5 in order to do the day 3 assignment. With the week 1, day 7 assignment, again, you count from day 1 of that week instead of day 3, which is what we had done previously. So they get 7 plus 3.5 is 10.5 days, rounded up to 11 days total to submit that assignment, as opposed to the old interpretation. So that's how the new measurement will work with calculating additional time. Now, again, that would reset when we hit week 2. You count from day 1 of week 2 to the day that the assignment is due in the week 2 in order to see how much extra time the student will get. Now, the last thing I'll mention is this is a bit more complicated with our Pinnacle courses that have converted because we kind of get away from the weekly structure, so it doesn't apply as well anymore. So the clarification I received from the Disability Services team is that we count from day 1 of that milestone. So if it's a 14-day milestone and a student has something due, usually the final milestone submission due on day 14 of that milestone, they would get 21 days to do that assignment instead of just 14, because you count from day 1 of that milestone. So 14 days times 50% extra time is an extra 7 days for a total of 21 days to do that final milestone submission, which I'm a bit concerned about because that seems like an excessive amount of extra time to do the work. So we're in the process of reviewing how that application of the extra time calculation works and if it's still appropriate given our new shift to Pinnacle courses. If anything changes, I'll let you know down the road, but that's a conversation that's happening in the background. But for now, that's the appropriate way to calculate it. So I know that was a lot of math that I was speaking about verbally, which isn't the easiest to interpret, but are there any questions about how to calculate extra time?
Are you going to send out a policy statement on this?
Yeah, I could recap that through an email. It'd probably be easiest to have that written down.
Okay.
I may even go ahead and just put together a table of what all those calculations are, so that way there aren't any chances of some people misinterpreting how those should be calculated. I could probably do that later today.
Thank you.
Okay, so Eric, this is Mike Green. So we would want, ideally, some kind of, maybe even before the class begins, some kind of email that tells us that we have a disabled student, so we could then calculate the appropriate times necessary for them.
Yeah, so the way that works is students can apply in order to get disability accommodations by contacting our disability services department. Once they go through a fairly rigorous process of the department reviewing their application and then their medical documentation, they go ahead and put together an accommodations letter that they provide to the student, and that letter entails any officially recognized accommodations that the student will receive. Now the student is, it's left to the student to decide if they want to disclose that they have a disability in each individual course that they take. So that isn't provided globally to everyone by the disability services team, but rather it's the student's responsibility to email you and send you that accommodations letter if they want it to be recognized. So it's on the student to decide, do they want to disclose that and receive official accommodations or not in each individual course. So the important thing to note about that is the accommodations are not retroactive. So if a student chooses to send you that letter on day 3 of week 1, then those accommodations wouldn't apply for days 1 and 2 of that week because they did not have you officially recognize the accommodations until day 3. So it's not retroactive, but once they do send it to you at that point, you'd want to kind of explain to the student how that will impact the due dates for all of their assignments. So hopefully that's clear.
Okay, thank you, Eric.
Any other questions about disability accommodations?
I typed this
oh, go ahead.
I typed in a question at the bottom. What final grades do we give the special ed students if they've got extra, when the class is over, they've still got more time?
Right, I was just going to throw that in there. So it is a bit of a problem, particularly with our Pinnacle courses at the end of the final module. Let's imagine it's a 10-day module 3. That's the last, or not module, milestone. Let's imagine it's a 10-day milestone at the end of the class, and the final milestone submission is due on the last day. If they get 50% extra time, that would give them 15 days rather than 10 days to do that final milestone. Now, final grades are due 2 days after the end of the class, which would be 12 days from the start of milestone 3. So the student would actually have 3 days beyond when your final grades are due to get that final milestone submission in. So this is going to cause problems with getting final grades in on time. So what I would recommend in that instance is insert whatever grade they have at the time, and then if they, in the instance that they don't manage to get the assignment in before your final grades are due, just submit a change of grade form after the fact and explain that the rationale for it is you had to follow their disability accommodations and recognize them. Any other questions? Okay, moving on to the reentry student reach out policy. This is an email I sent probably 2 weeks ago or so at this point. Just to explain what a reentry student is before I explain the policy. So we have students that start with us, and then at a certain point in their time here, they may decide to withdraw for whatever reason. Now, if that same student decides to re-enter their enrollment here at the school, that would make them a re-entry student because they've already started taking X number of classes, and now they're coming back and starting with us again. So the goal policy is to lend a little bit of extra support to those reentry students that are coming back for the first time after maybe a month, it could be a couple of years, depends on each student's situation, just to help support them through the process. So what the policy says is if you have a reentry student in your class, a representative from our graduation team is going to contact you to let you know that you have a reentry student in your class. And then what you'll want to do is call the student and try to get in touch with them just to, on day one, introduce yourself, see if they have any questions, etc., and make sure that they're situated and prepared for the class. What the policy says is to try calling them on day one. If they don't pick up, leave a message. Call again on day two. If they don't pick up or leave a message, send an email, and then you can leave it at that. It's on the student to get back to you at that point. But that's all the policy is, just to help support those students that are re-entering their programs. And there shouldn't be too many of these in your classes, since most of our students are continuing students, students that have been with us for a while. So hopefully this won't be too much of an additional burden on our faculty. So any questions about that reach out policy? Again, you don't have to do anything until someone contacts you about it. Hey Chelsea, how's it going?
I'm good. I didn't mean to interrupt someone else. I just wanted to find out what's going on with the list of students that come with a do not call on their record. And this is the first time I've seen it. What's the policy on that? It's a do not call.
So that's a bit of an awkward situation. So typically, if a student has a do not call on their record, that's because they want nothing to do with the institution anymore. So it's a bit odd for a student that is a reentry student and taking classes with us to request no phone calls, or more specifically, to never be contacted by the institution again. In that instance, I would reply to whoever contacts you to reach out to the reentry student and make sure it's okay to call them, or just to question, why does the student have a do not call listed if they're actively enrolled here? We should be able to reach out to them, because that's an odd situation.
Do not call is usually in place of the phone number, or I also have students that do the 999 all the way through instead of giving an actual phone number. I usually have at least 3 or 4 do not call students in every one of my classes.
Okay, that's odd. I would just email them if it's that prevalent of an issue, and we'll leave it up to the graduation team to update their contact information if the phone numbers are either inaccurate, or if the student has some sort of tacit agreement with the institution that I want to go to school there, but I don't ever want to be contacted by phone, which again I think would make it difficult for the student to get through scheduling their classes, etc. But if that's the arrangement they have, we have to respect that.
Okay,
Okay,
thanks.
thank you.
Okay, speaking of a reach out policy, Jen Cooper, our Dean of Online Programs, just sent out a new one last night, to my surprise. So I figure I'll add that in as another bullet point here. So that policy is designed to increase the communication between our academic counseling team and our faculty. So basically all the policy says is if a student has not logged into their class for 5 days or more, the academic counselor is going to email the faculty to make them aware of that and to share any communication that they've had with the student over the past 5 days. So that way we're kept up to speed with what the situation is with those students, instead of just wondering, the student disappeared, I have no idea why, so I'm not sure what to do about it. So hopefully that will help make our lives a little easier and give us some insight into some of the barriers that our students are facing. The other piece of that policy is if the academic counselor has reached out to that student over the past 5 days unsuccessfully, then we should also make a phone call and send an email to that student, just as another attempt to reach that student and try to find out what's going on. So most of the time, I think that the academic counselors will probably be successful and will have contacted the student, but sometimes it may require us to make that phone call and send that email. So that's all that policy is. So any questions about it? Good. Alrighty. Let's talk a bit about Pinnacle. I think I've already talked to quite a few of you about this, and I'm sure back when Elise Mandamia was here, she's contacted those of you in the sciences department about Pinnacle, and many of you have already lived it, as some of our courses have converted to the Pinnacle design, nutrition, for example. But Pinnacle is a new way of envisioning our curriculum. So before, our courses were, I don't want to say disorganized, but there wasn't always or necessarily a common theme that students were working toward from one assignment to the next. So the goal of Pinnacle is to create a sense of linearity in the work that students are accomplishing in their classes. And the way that we do that is redesigning the classes so each assignment builds upon the next one. So just to give an example, the course, let me back up a second. Before I give an example, the other piece of it is breaking away from the concept that all of our courses need to be stuck in that standard 6-week model with 5 full weeks and then a 3-day week at the end. So we're reconceptualizing the structure of our class to be whatever we want. Most commonly, I think you'll see that our classes will be broken up into, first off, it's called milestones now. It's the new language once our courses are converted. And the milestones tend to be 2 14-day milestones and then a third 10-day milestone that will encapsulate the full course. The milestones tend to include one discussion, and then they also tend to include a task submission as well as a final milestone submission. That's the basic structure. It could vary quite a bit from that, and that will depend both on the nature of the course, the level of the course, whether it's a 1,000 versus a 4,000, and obviously we'll approach things differently in a mathematics course as opposed to an English course, for example. But that's the general structure. Now the key difference, again, is that the assignments will all build upon one another. So the discussion that students will complete in each milestone will be related to the final milestone submission that they're submitting at the end of that milestone. So while they're doing work and having a discussion in the classroom, just like usual, that work will later be able to be applied to that milestone submission. So it's helping prepare them for their future assignments. The task submission that's due before the milestone submission, the final milestone submission in each milestone of the course, tends to be a first draft of whatever the final milestone is. So as you can imagine, the final milestones tend to be a bit more complex than what we have currently in our courses for our typical Dropbox assignments. So students will be submitting essentially a first draft of what will be their final milestone submission for their task submission that leads to the final milestone. And then your goal as a faculty member is not to grade for content when they turn in that task, but rather to grade for whether or not they turned it in, essentially. And it's worth a nominal number of points, usually 10 or 20, just to note if they did the assignment or not. But the real goal is for you to provide all of your corrective feedback in that task submission. So this is where you'll write your narrative feedback, you'll explain the strengths and weaknesses of what the student did, so that way they can take that feedback and improve upon their first draft for their final milestone submission, which is usually later in the same week. Now, when you get to the final milestone submission, those tend to be worth a heftier number of points because we have to make up for the missing assignments that students tend to complete on a more consistent basis than our current structure of our classes. So it's usually worth a bigger number of points, maybe 200 to 250 or so, depending on the class. And the final milestone submission you'll be looking at essentially their second draft or final draft of whatever it was that they submitted for the task submission. So when you look at this final draft, you won't need to spend as much time providing that qualitative or narrative feedback again to explain what students did right and wrong, since you already did that before with the task submission. So what's nice about this is you focus more heavily on the grading aspect, explaining where they did and didn't approve, but the real goal here is just to assess the assignment rather than to provide feedback at this point. So this is a structure we're headed toward with all of our classes. What's nice about it from a student and faculty perspective is it's many fewer assignments that need to be completed and graded from your perspective. So just thinking about it in terms of discussions, if we have 3 milestones in the course, there are only 3 discussions as opposed to the 5, sometimes 6, that you're currently managing in your classes. So right there, that cuts your workload in half, and it also cuts down on how many discussions the students need to participate in. So the goal here is to get students to more meaningfully engage in the discussions that they do participate in, since there are fewer of them. The other piece, similarly, is hopefully students will naturally improve their success throughout the course, because if students are always revising their task submission before their final milestone submission, this gives them a chance to polish their work before it's graded and assessed. Whereas now, sometimes students will submit work that's completely off base, and they don't have a chance to revise it because there's no revision process built into the class. So this can help alleviate that issue that we have within some of our current classes. And the other thing that's nice about it is, again, you're revisiting work that the student has already done. So it should be much less of an investment on your behalf to go in and grade all these assignments. Not to mention it's a fewer number total compared to what you had to manage currently. So in a nutshell, that is the direction that we're moving with our curriculum. And while it's very appropriate for our program-specific courses, they usually tend to take a project-based approach within those classes. We're taking more of a problem-based approach within general education in order to make it more applicable to our general education classes. And of course, naturally, there will be some issues applying it to our survey courses, depending on the nature of the class. But we have subject matter experts that are identified to work on this and iron out those issues to make sure that we're still addressing all the course competencies with a reduced number of assignments in our classes. Some of the courses, as I mentioned, have already been converted to this Pinnacle design. However, if they have not, that's something that's going to be happening probably within the next year or so, depending on the class. Some of them are currently in progress. For example, some of our psychology courses are currently being converted, but others we're slating to convert later in the year. It all depends on the course and the department, because the e-learning success team can only handle so much at once. But eventually, that's the endpoint we're looking at for all of our classes. So any questions about the Pinnacle model? Good, old news, that's what I thought. All right, so the last thing I'll mention and wanted to cover today is that we're in the process of transitioning to Brightspace, which is a new learning management system that's going to be replacing eCollege. We've used eCollege forever. However, Pearson announced that they are discontinuing eCollege at the end of this year. So you have no choice but to find a new learning management system to replace it with. So after quite an extensive review of a number of different learning management systems and feedback from different faculty and involvement from the executive level, the decision was made to move to Brightspace, which is a desire-to-learn product. We've already started piloting some of our classes within Brightspace. so far, the results seem promising. I think the greatest strength of converting to Brightspace is desire to learn, seems interested in working with us, and they're willing to customize it based upon what we ask them to do. So we have a chance to mold the classroom or the learning management system into exactly what we'd like it to become. Now that process is slow because it takes time to do that sort of a thing, but that's something we had no power to do before with eCollege. We were stuck with what we had. So we're looking forward to that. The goal is to have everything converted to Brightspace within the next few months. I don't know if we'll hit that timeline since, again, that's a huge amount of work that our e-learning success team has to do to convert our current curriculum from eCollege into the Brightspace platform. And it doesn't necessarily happen without any odd eccentricities that need to be ironed out. But that's something that they've been planning for about a year now, and they're in the process of doing. So don't worry, we will have extensive trainings available for each of you that will be mandatory, in fact, and it will count for faculty development credit for this year, which will teach you everything you need to know about the Brightspace platform. So we're in the process of developing those now. And actually, those trainings are being developed by our faculty that piloted the Brightspace platform. So I don't think there's anyone that would be better to design those trainings since they lived through the process of testing it out and figuring out how it works. So any questions about Brightspace? Good, quiet group. Well, at this point, that was everything I wanted to cover, but I know that it's not often we have a chance to all get together. So at this point, I just want to open the floor for any questions in general that you may have, or maybe you don't want to talk to me, but you want to talk to that other adjunct or faculty member that you don't get to talk to very often. So feel free to jump in and converse however you like, or ask whatever questions may be on your mind.
Eric, this is Mike Green. Quick question. I think I asked it, and I think someone else did. Will EDMC now be looking to hire more people as far as full-time?
That's a good question regarding full-time employment. And yes, I have neglected the chat, which I'll begin to peruse through right now, so I don't completely ignore it, because I know there are quite a few questions in there I'm seeing. So to answer your question, I don't know if we plan on hiring anyone for general education. If that were the intention, I imagine those jobs would have been posted already. And I'm only saying that as a guess because I've seen some full-time positions posted for program-specific areas, but not general education. So that's my hunch. So I would assume no. I don't think there will be any posted for general education, but I could be wrong.
Hi, I had a question. This is Allison Humphreys. If we've already been assigned 1 to 2 classes for 2017, is it safe to say then that we'd only be getting probably 1 or 2 other classes through the rest of the year?
If you've already been scheduled how many courses? I missed the first part.
Oh, I said if we've been scheduled 1 or 2 classes, is it safe to say that we'd only get 1 or 2 more classes probably throughout the rest of the year?
That's going to depend on your area of expertise. Because the number of adjunct faculty that we have on staff in each area varies quite a bit. So while we're in the process of hiring right now, and I've already hired probably 10 or so, I still have another 35 to go. I've been reviewing quite a few applications this week. But it takes time to get these faculty onboarded because they have to fill out all the appropriate paperwork. They need to go through the mandatory training, and most importantly, we need to have a course available for them about 35 to 40 days in advance to schedule them for, since it takes that much time to get them onboarded. So it's a difficult and tricky process to get these people into place, even once I do hire them. So I would think that you'll probably see course invitations with some regularity, at least through the April starts. But come May, I think that things might start to slow down a bit, because that's when we're really shooting to get a lot of these new people involved.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And just so you're all aware, as far as how I plan on scheduling everyone, my goal is to schedule an order of who has taught least recently. So looking through everyone that we have on staff, whenever a course becomes available, once we have all these people onboarded, I'm going to schedule whoever is not taught the most recently. So that way everyone is as active as possible. Okay, Mark also asked a while ago, I'm going through these questions here, cannot reduce the number of students in courses requiring a reduction in workload hours. Mark, maybe you'd want to go ahead and elaborate. Oh, there's another point here as well. Rather than increasing the number of adjuncts, so you're asking why not just increase the number of students to reduce the number of classes that we have to offer? Because if we reduce the number of students in courses, then we'd have even more sections running that I couldn't double faculty up in. So I'd need to hire even more than I'm planning on hiring now, if that makes sense. But feel free to jump in if I'm missing something.
Hi, Eric. Yeah, it just seems as if what could have happened is that the number of hours could have been changed to comply with the state requirements of Pennsylvania. And, no, I just don't get it.
So is your question specifically in relation to, because there are a lot of moving parts with the state requirements, but is your question in respect to the course caps and why they're as high as they are?
Yeah, well, I've seen a number of increasing course caps throughout the years. And, we put a lot of effort into reaching out to students. And it just, it just seems like there could have been some other way to work around the state requirements rather than increasing the number of adjuncts. I mean, I don't know exactly what those requirements are, but the people who are really getting the brunt of, what's happening with regard to the state are the adjuncts.
Yeah, in terms of reducing the total number of courses that are available to our adjuncts, you're absolutely right. What I can say about the course caps, which is a bit of a separate issue, although it's somewhat related, is there's also a state requirement for that. So with the course cap, Pennsylvania requires us, rather it's not the course cap, but a student-instructor ratio that's a requirement. Pennsylvania requires us to have at least a 15-to-1 student-instructor ratio. Our current student-instructor ratio for the entire institution is lower than that. We're more like 12-to-1 or 13-to-1, which you would think would be a good thing, because that would mean that faculty are providing more private instruction to our students and individualized attention per student that we have, but it's a problem if it's too low with the state. So we have to increase course caps in order to not have an issue with our student-instructor ratio being too low. What's particularly tricky about this is you're probably wondering, well, why are our course caps so high in general education at 28? How could we possibly have a problem with this? The problem isn't with general education, but it's with our program-specific courses. So as students progress through their programs, they're getting toward the end. There's a natural amount of student attrition that's occurring in the meantime. And as a result, once students get toward the end of their programs of study, there are only so many students that need to take courses at that point. And we can't deny students the opportunity to complete the courses that they need in order to graduate, even though we have a very low number of students that may need those courses. So in program-specific areas, there are some classes that will run with a very low number of students, which is dropping our student-instructor ratio for the overall institution. The only way we can combat that is through our general education courses and increasing the course cap in these classes. So as a result, we have to bear a larger load of students in order to try to stay in compliance with the state guideline to have 15 students to each instructor in each of our classes. So that's an explanation of why our course caps have continued to increase in general education, and the way we've tried to combat that is through the Pinnacle model, which is we're trying to reduce the number of assignments that we have compared to what we had before. Many of you will remember a long time ago we used to have 3 assignments per week, sometimes 6 assignments per week, depending on the class, which was already an unmanageable amount of work, but we've continued to decrease this quite a bit throughout the years. So at most, there should be 2 or 3 assignments per week in each of our classes, depending on where you're teaching. And hopefully it will be even further reduced with the Pinnacle model.
But there's something else that's going on here as well, and that is that we're reaching out to students much more than we used to do that in the past. I mean, there's like 3 different requirements now with regard to reaching out to students. We have the midterm assignment. We have to reach out to them every time they're posting late assignments. And now
I think it's drastically increased. So a long time ago, our policy used to be whenever students start a class with us, we need to call them in the first week of class. So we ended up replacing that with the midterm check-in assignment instead. So the midterm check-in assignment wasn't necessarily an increase from what we did before. But with these 2 additional policies, it is true you may need to call students more often than before, but the number of reentry students that we have is relatively small. So hopefully it shouldn't be more than 2 or 3 students per class at most that you're teaching, as well as with the students that are inactive, we already had reach out policies in place for that, essentially, where if a student doesn't submit an assignment, you're reaching out to them to see how things are going. Now it's just a more formalized approach that involves the academic counselor. And the other piece is you may not need to reach out to them if the academic counselor is already successful in doing so. So I'm not going to deny that the number of times you need to reach out to students has increased over the years, but I don't think these 2 new policies should have that drastic of an impact. And we'll have to see how that plays out once they're implemented.
just one last question. Are we going to see any raise in compensation?
As far as I know, there hasn't been any discussion of that, although that's something that we have discussed and brought up numerous times, that the compensation's been stagnant as far as I can remember. Yet the number of things we're asking our faculty to do is only increased, and the number of students that we're putting in each course has increased as well.
Compensation if you're asking more from us, and if the caps keep increasing, and I just don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had a better answer for you. The one solution that we potentially have down the pipeline to try to reduce the number of students rather, that we have in general education is potentially moving away from the multi-track system that we have currently. So we have the track 3, track 4, and the plus track, and condensing all of that into a single track, kind of like what we had a long time ago, just those 8 campus-based tracks that would run each year. If we do that, the benefit is that will reduce the total number of classes that are running by putting excess students that may run in rather small sections into other sections with their peers and students from campus-based locations, which naturally should increase the student-instructor ratio in all of our classes, which as a result should allow us to reduce the number of students that we're putting in our general education courses, since we'll be meeting that 15-to-1 ratio requirement. a complex solution. I don't know when it will happen if it does, but I know it's something that they're looking at. But I can assure you that Matthew Falcone, our Associate Dean of Faculty, is aware of the concerns you're bringing up and how our general education faculty are working very hard with high course caps, and that the compensation hasn't changed as a result.
You're talking about, this is Priscilla, you're talking about course caps and the number of students. The last class I had, I started off with 31 students and I ended up with 28. This time I've got 28 in a class. That's twice what I was teaching years ago. And now you're saying that the classes are not going to be 5.5 weeks, but they may be 4.5 weeks, et cetera, et cetera. So will we get paid according to the number of weeks or the class itself, or do you know?
Yeah, that's a good point. So the number of weeks in the classes actually isn't changing with the Pinnacle model. So that will stay consistent.
Many A's. They were excellent students.
Well, so far you've asked some very real questions that are important to talk about. I know they're sensitive in nature, but I'm glad you're being candid and asking these things. So is there anything else that you want to go over, or any other burning questions that have been in the back of your mind? Going once. Alrighty. Well, if that is everything, thanks again, everyone, for joining today. Like I said, I'm recording this, so I'll make sure that all of you receive a copy of it, as well as everyone else that wasn't able to make it, since they're required to watch this, since we're covering some important information that everyone needs to hear. But thanks again for your work that you put in to your classes, and I know again, certain changes over time are difficult to stomach since there's been quite a bit of change over the years. And we're trying to do what we can from a curricular perspective in order to reduce the workload and to make it manageable to combat consistently increasing course caps as well as stagnant adjunct pay, which hasn't changed over the years. So hopefully that's all balancing out. Also, another way we've tried to combat that is potentially with group posts, which I'd like to remind you is an option. So instead of responding individually to every student within your classes, you can create clusters of 4 or 5, which could limit the amount of time that you need to spend managing the discussion. So that's an option as well. But anyway, in lieu of all those things, thanks for continuing to do all the things that you do on a daily basis to make our school excellent. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me privately or reach out to me anytime. I'm always happy to help. But have a great Wednesday afternoon.